Morning from Los Angeles and good afternoon to the East Coasters. Lovely to see all of you, some of whom I have worked with before. I want to keep this moving along so that we can actually give you back some time as well. Thanks for joining. I'm Rhee, Head of Partnerships and Place-Based Philanthropy at the American Journalism Project, which many of you know is a venture philanthropy that's dedicated to nonprofit local news. Today, I will be interviewing Natalie Kelinske with the Waco Community Foundation. She is a Senior Director of Communications and Donor Services. She's been there about 6 years. And I have to say, she's been thinking about this for someone who isn't a journalist. She's been thinking about journalism and local news for a long time. We've been talking for about 2 years about what someone in her position at a community foundation can and might do around strengthening local news and the information ecosystem in her community. So Natalie, thanks for this conversation. We're going to talk today, obviously, about how you got involved and give both part of your narrative as well as some tactics, things that you did that others might replicate as well. So thank you and welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Natalie, I think that we've got a probably nice broad geographic representation here. For those who have never been to Waco, Texas, or don't know about Waco, just do a little bit of scene setting about your community.
Yeah, so Waco is right in the middle of Texas, and we're really known for two things. So I'm gonna just do a quick screen share. One is the Branch Davidian disaster that happened several decades ago, about 25 years ago. And the second is Fixer Upper and the Magnolia Silos and Chip and Joanna Gaines. And obviously, we really prefer one over the other in terms of what we're known for. But it is what it is. And I think it's interesting, when I used to go to conferences and say I'm from Waco, it was always about the Branch Davidians, and now it's a really good mix. So we have some positive in there too. Waco is about 130,000 people within the city limits. We have a county that's about 250,000 people. The county is actually pretty rural outside of Waco. I actually live in a small town north of Waco, a farming community, which is very similar to the rest of our county. Waco Foundation has about $135 million under assets. We're a very mid-sized community foundation. Our population is, in terms of diversity, is about 40% white, 35% Hispanic, and 20% Black. We do have a fairly high poverty rate, especially within the city of Waco. It is changing some. I would say over the last 5 years, we've seen some big growth and revitalization, but of course that comes with concerns of gentrification, which is a top priority and area of concern for our community leadership. Waco Foundation itself operates under a leadership model. So all community foundations are different. All funders are very different. We've been very fortunate. We're an older community foundation, especially for this part of the country. And we've received several large unrestricted bequests over time, which allows us flexibility to take leadership roles within our community. We don't have to fundraise or charge fees for our operations. So we don't have the same fund model, acquiring new funds to fund the foundation that a lot of community foundations do. So that really gives us some flexibility to take on initiatives like nonprofit news.
Great, thank you. I'm going to interject a question about your background, because something I hear from community foundations, from small to billion-dollar-plus endowments, is we don't have a journalism program officer. We don't have a program officer who is tasked with assessing the information needs of our community. So that was not a deterrent for you or your community foundation. Before I ask you to give part of your journey in learning about information needs, tell us about what was a driver for you and why and how you felt equipped if you are not a journalism program officer.
Sure. So I am not. We have about 13 people on staff. So pretty small staff. And we do have, a program officer. But journalism for me was really about, well, first it was a personal interest. I read lots of papers. I still get papers delivered to my home, which I know is different than a lot of people. But so it was an interest to me personally. And it's really, Waco Foundation kind of embraces when your personal interests align with some of the community priorities. And so as we started looking and noticing about the state of local news in our community, it was a good fit for me. But my primary job is donor services and marketing. So this is kind of a project that the board has allowed me to take on because of my interest in it and their prioritization.
Great, thank you. Let's talk about the beginning of your journey, both your personal journey as well as that of the Waco Community Foundation. How it is that this process developed, and any sort of lessons that you think of along the way as you tell this journey.
Yeah, so I think that it just became apparent, as in most communities over the last 10 years, how particularly our local newspaper has declined. We went from dozens of reporters to, I think we have 4 or 5 now, and they're just not able to cover many of the major issues that are taking place because there's 4 or 5 of them. And also in talking with them, they're faced with their for-profit model. And so they have to focus on things that receive clicks. And a lot of times that's going to be the new restaurant that's opening versus the school's bond election, or test scores, or how, the city government is performing. And then in 2017, I attended the Night Media Forum, really for a completely separate reason. We were looking at something else. And it was eye-opening and helpful to understand that most communities are facing the same issue. And I think what was really helpful was to understand how philanthropy has played a major role in success stories of nonprofit news. So there may be some, but really the most successful ventures included a gigantic philanthropic portion. And so it really allowed me space to say, this is something that we need to consider as part of our mission in the community. So I began doing research at that time about kind of building my case. Like, I need to take this to the board. Again, they all knew the state of the newspaper, but how are we really building a case that this is Waco Foundation's concern and a larger community concern? So as part of that, there's tons of research out there, which I'm sure all of you have seen, but and none of this will come as a surprise, but you have less representation with your local elected officials. That's a problem. You have less local engagement on major issues because people have inequitable access to information. You really see communities become more polarized because they're consuming national outlets versus your local outlets that really have a history of being more bipartisan, more equitable in terms of what they're reporting. And one thing that I thought was really interesting that hadn't crossed my mind was municipal bond rates increased by about 5.5 basis points within 5 years of a newspaper leaving town or dissolving. And so that was really important information to bring to our board, that this is not only about kind of the feel-good stuff, but it also has real fiscal consequences that we need to pay attention to. So our board wasn't surprised by it either. We're also really fortunate. Texas is a gigantic state, but we are really close to Austin in terms of being close in Texas. It's about an hour and a half away. And, the Texas Tribune is based in Austin, which is certainly a model for nonprofit news. And it was already something our board was super familiar with. So presenting kind of why it matters and then giving them an example that was really tangible that they already knew and they already appreciated really helped kind of allow them to say, we need to prioritize this work.
Natalie, let's back up just a little bit. So the process is, you educated yourself. you made this a priority. And then it sounds like then you went to educate your CEO, whom you introduced me to. What else can you say about what you did as a representative of the Community Foundation and either equipping yourself or your board?
I talked to other foundations who were looking into this to see what are some real life examples, because I think it's helpful when you can say this is how other communities are addressing this and kind of give them some things to chew on. Just reading all the time, and this topic makes news all over the country. And so forwarding those articles to the board, forwarding them to our community leaders. So we have 2 other larger foundations in town, and I wanted to make sure from the beginning that they were super aware of what we were looking at and why this is an issue. We haven't made any asks of them at all at this point, but I wanted to bring those executive directors and their boards along too. So it was a lot of learning. That was probably the biggest thing for me. Is I am not claiming to be an expert, but I wanted to learn as much as I could, and then just have these conversations as often as I could. And it was surprising to me how easy it was to bring this topic up. I mean, it's something that everyone's talking about, especially now but with COVID-19 in Texas, we could really see how disinformation, misinformation, and lack of information played a role in the health of our community. And so it kind of focused on why local news and local reporting about local issues is so important.
And Natalie, to your credit also, I feel like you also did a lot of outreach and conversations with me and others. You asked for the big picture. So I think part of your story, the illustration here, is that it takes one person in a community foundation who equips himself or herself to move this along. And again, I think in some conversations that we had, without saying too much, you were also putting your standing, your experience, your credibility within your foundation, within the community, to say, look, this is an area that we should focus on, and it matches and aligns with everything else that we're doing as a community foundation.
Absolutely. And I will also give a lot of credit to our executive director for giving me the space to do this. Once we had many conversations about it, and once she was really on board, that gave me a lot of freedom to start talking about this all the time.
Right. And, you did rely on national resources, including NITE, the NITE Media Forum, and other national partners. So I think we are now probably at the point where you can describe what we're doing together, our organizations are doing together.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, I talked to several different philanthropic organizations that were doing something in this space. I talked to NITE, I talked to our board. I probably gave them 6 full presentations, and I think at the end of it, they were just like, just give her what she wants. So she'll stop talking about this right now.
Over the span of, you gave 6 presentations over what time span? I think that's important.
Probably about 2.5 years. And our board meets every other month. So that was several, full-blown 45-minute presentations. And I do think while they are very bought into this, at some point they were like, let's just get this girl what she needs so she'll get going and stop talking to us about it.
Yes.
So once our board said, yes, you can start working on this, we will prioritize it in terms of our work and in terms of funding. I visited with a lot of other foundations. I reached back out to NITE Foundation, and they put me in touch with Alice at American Journalism Project, because we really, in talking to everyone else, we realized we needed more information. We couldn't just come up with potential solutions without having a full picture, or at least that's how we approached it. And so when I had the first conversation with Alice and American Journalism Project, they have done this before. They knew exactly what we were looking for and kind of what our community needed. And so we, throughout conversations, put together a landscape analysis, a research project that American Journalism Project is going to conduct for us. And that's really going to give us a better understanding. I mentioned our local paper. We also have 4 local television news outlets. We have several community kind of blogs and websites. And so they're really going to take a look at what exists. How are people getting information? What kinds of information are they getting? What topics are they focusing on? What's, receiving the most consumption? And then where are the gaps? And I want to take a minute here to talk about our foundation's biggest priority area of work is race equity. And of course, across the United States, this is a huge issue. It is a very big issue in Waco, Texas. And what we know is that our local newspaper has throughout history served white, middle to upper class individuals. And so our board was very interested not only in the broader concept of local news, but developing a solution that everyone has access to accurate, reliable information that's relevant to them as they live their lives throughout the community. So that's also going to be a big part of this research project that AJP is helping us move forward with. So we're getting ready to kick that off pretty soon, actually in a couple of weeks.
Natalie, let's also put this within some context. So your story, and I think what might be helpful to folks who are here representing community foundations or other funders or nonprofit news outlets, is that one, it's been a process and you've been this internal advocate, but you're just at the beginning of a process. So what you've got in your foundation, what you and your colleagues have agreed to do is to look at the landscape. And then from there, as you imagine, and of course, this is highly speculative, but in commissioning this work to look at the quantitative and qualitative data sets around information needs and the ecosystem in your community, you are going to do something with that. And why is that a helpful step? And what do you hope might come out of that?
Sure. So that is really the end goal, right? Is to develop a solution or multiple solutions that solve the problem of low access to local news. That's our end goal. And that is, bottom line, that is so incredibly important to not only Waco Foundation, but to our entire community, because what good is it to do all of this other work that we're doing if we can't share it, if we don't give people the access to the information about the programs that exist? And so without a way to do that right now, we feel it, we really do. And building out a solution to that, whatever that looks like, and I have lots of ideas, but we truly don't know because we haven't done the research yet. It is so incredibly important to ensure that Waco Foundation can continue to do our work and meet our mission, because right now we have a big roadblock.
Now, let me ask you to touch on two things that you just said. One is, you and I have talked about the importance of editorial independence for nonprofit news organizations. Certainly you respect that as someone who's both a consumer and someone who cares about news ecosystem. So I feel like our conversations, you've been really clear that as a funder, your role is to help support whatever one of those solutions may be with a respect for editorial independence.
That's absolutely right. And that was really one of the first questions our board had. And we invited Evan Smith from the Texas Tribune to come in and talk to our board, when we first started these conversations. And he told us a story about, of course, they're funded through sponsorships. And one of their primary sponsors became a news story because of some less than desirable things that were being pushed out. It was in the public health sphere. And the sponsor became very upset that the Texas Tribune was publishing this information. That certainly was news, but the Texas Tribune did what it's supposed to do as a journalism outlet and continued. That sponsor dropped their sponsorship for 2 years, but then ended up picking it back up. And so I think our board, that was really important to get that out of the way.
Yes.
Our board members themselves are very respected members of the community. They are all, business owners or carry positions of leadership. And it could be that there is news about them or about their business partners or, something like that, and that it is not the job or appropriate in any way for Waco Foundation or any sponsor of the end product to interfere with that. And so whatever that ends up looking like, whatever our end result is, they will have editorial autonomy to make the decisions about the information and the news that they're sharing. That
Great.
Bottom line, yes.
And then you touched on how you asked this question. We've talked about it before. Look, if we don't have information, if we don't have a way for people to know what's happening, really stressing the importance of local news. You were able to make that argument, but would you say more about that, how you connected the grant making work of the foundation, the other priorities? How does it make sense to, or how does it reinforce the other work that you're doing?
Yeah, well, I think on a very basic level, Waco Foundation does not run very many programs, but we have some, and they include a scholarship guarantee program. When COVID-19 hit and the schools closed, our ability to access the students within that program just plummeted. And we had no way, we put it in the paper, there was a story about it, but it wasn't reaching the intended audience. And so that, again, it was just a spotlight on why it's important to have an information resource that is relevant to everyone and reaches your broad population. Our nonprofits struggle with the same thing. So we also had, I know everyone probably north of Texas will laugh at this, but we had a severe winter storm in January of last year.
It was severe.
It really shut our entire world down. And unfortunately caused a lot of problems, a lot of busted pipes. We're just not equipped with the infrastructure to handle temperatures like that. And so there were federal and state funds that came in to support and help individuals and families who were in need from this winter storm, but getting the information out there could not happen through the local news, television, or the newspapers. We had to actually contract with grassroots nonprofit organizations to spread the information because there was no central place that we could do that. So those are just two really small examples that took place within 3 or 4 months of each other.
Oh, I don't think they're small examples. You're talking about weather, which affects daily life. Yes, what happened in Texas was it was probably just the equivalent of a Tuesday in Boston in January, but for Texas and with the power grid and the state infrastructure, it was a massive event and made national news. But I think those are two very salient and actually pretty significant examples. We're also getting great questions in here, so I'm going to transition in a minute. But I would like to ask you to do, I think, kind of describe the vehicle. So you and I have talked about this as funders of nonprofit news. We've talked about different vehicles. They can be individuals, it can be family foundations, it can be many vehicles for supporting nonprofit local news outlets in a region or city. Why do you feel that a community foundation is a really ideal vehicle?
Well, and all community foundations are a little bit different. For us, I believe we were the institution to get this ball rolling for a couple of reasons. One, we already have we carry this leadership space within our community. So when issues are presented, we're often the first or second call that's made for help. And so that gives us an audience. We're able to convene the players when we need to, and we try to respect that and do that only when needed. But we have this power to convene that many of our other institutions don't. We also have the capacity for staff to help support this and flexibility there, and we have funding to get it going. So I think all of those things locally are why Waco Foundation was the right institution to start this work. We can't be the only ones participating, certainly, but we can make the case for it within our community and within our leadership. I don't think community foundations are always going to be the best vehicle. I think there are going to be lots of instances where other institutions are able to lead this in their own communities. But for us specifically, it just made sense.
And you've also mentioned, look, you're nonpartisan. You have space. You're a convening body. You're not you have the kind of neutrality and seen as a good faith actor in your community as well. So those are some additional points that I think might be helpful. Let's move to, and thank you all for your great questions. Let's move to just a list of some of the lessons that you've learned and advice that you're giving. I mean, this is something that has become a cottage industry for me and you, where I will meet a community foundation of small, medium, and large size, and they want to consider this, and I'll say, talk to Natalie, ask her about her process. So just give some advice, lessons learned.
So again, the most important thing I think to start is to learn everything you can and familiarize yourself with examples from other communities, because they're out there, and we're all in different stages, but kind of find examples that are relevant to you and your board. Don't stop talking about it. Talk about it all the time. Get your staff on board, and then get your board on board, and then your community leadership. And I'm not kidding, it's so easy. You would be surprised at how often, well, you all know this, how often this topic comes up. And when you can say, you know what, we're actually working on this, and these are some of the things that we're thinking about, people just, I mean, they want to participate. They want to be a part of that. They see the need for it. And so I would just say, keep talking, keep talking, keep talking. I also did a couple of things for our board. I created like a set of talking points so that they could familiarize themselves with the language that we were using, the concept, and why Waco Foundation was taking on this work. Because we do get questions of, you know, we have poverty in our community, and we have hunger, and our public schools aren't performing where they need to be. So why are you focusing on news? And so enabling them to be able to talk about that and lay out the case of, well, this is why, because it impacts all of those other areas you talk about. We also did a really small study a couple of years ago. We did it at back to school nights within our public schools. It was just a survey. It was available in English and Spanish. And it helped us. We had several hundred participants. It wasn't very long, and we had a couple of incentives to give to people who took it. But it told us a lot about how people are getting information right now. And of course, we will significantly expand that with our project with AJP. But that gave our board enough information. It showed very clearly that television news is where people are going. Second is Facebook, and then Twitter. So our newspaper was way down at the bottom, along with some other things that we may have thought would be higher up in terms of where people are looking. It also gave us information about the types of things people want from their local news resources. And so again, it was just really short. It would not be statistically significant in any way, but it painted a picture. And that, again, really helped our board see clearly why this was an issue.
Okay, thank you. And let's transition to questions for the last 10, 14 minutes here. Thank you all for such thoughtful questions. Natalie, I think this question is from Melanie, but important. What were some of the sticking points? What were some of the objections stated or perceived that you had to overcome with your board, maybe other peers, asking the question, why are you spending so much time on this? What were some sticking points?
Yeah, I think the issue, the reputation that news and journalism unfortunately has in a broader context. So why would we want to get involved in that? People don't trust news. There's all of these other things that people are looking at. So why are we going to spend time trying to reinvent something when we know people are just going to go to social media and rely on things that are, misinformation and things like that. And of course, the answer is because they're doing that. And so we need to provide a resource that is hyper local and from people that they know and trust. Of course, funneling funds, I kind of hit on this in the last question, but funneling resources into something like this that is less tangible than poverty, hunger, education, animal welfare, any number of topics is a little bit of a sticking point. And so to resolve that, we created these talking points in this case that our board members and community leadership could feel comfortable sharing. I think those were two of the big ones. And then sometimes remaining focused is sometimes difficult too, because as a smaller foundation with a smaller staff, there are lots of things that are going on. So prioritizing this for me personally hasn't been that difficult because it's a high interest of mine. I have a high interest in it, but making sure that I'm reminding our executive director and reminding our other staff that this is something that we're working on so that so that other things don't take resources away from that.
Great, thank you. Another question from Harry. Have you received grant requests, applications? Has the foundation done any funding previously of nonprofit news?
No, well, that's not true. We do have some small sponsorships for the Texas Tribune. We've contracted with them actually to do some events in Waco, and then we've made some sponsorships to them. In terms of what we're doing locally, though, we've done two things. There's a blog, a community blog that is a very grassroots organization. It was created by someone 8 years ago, completely as a volunteer. It kind of grew and has a pretty robust following. She was ready to retire and move on. She was just doing this as kind of a favor to the community. We said, hang on, while we're doing this with the American Journalism Project, we don't want this to go away because this could be a real viable part of the solution that we come up with. So we made a grant to that. They were a nonprofit. We made a grant to them to hire their first paid staff, really just continue throughout the project. And I think that was around $35,000 for a year is what we gave them. And then of course, we're making the investment with the American Journalism Project to do this research. So those are our first two grants. They've come from the foundation internally from me. We haven't received outside requests.
Okay, great, thank you. This question comes from Tracy, who asks if there's a good list or any list of community foundations that have a specific journalism pooled fund. Her note, we're trying to push for a pooled fund in Chicago.
I don't know the answer to that. If I can get your contact information, I can send you a couple that I know of that I've visited with, but I don't know. Knight Foundation would probably be a great place to reach out to for something like that. I think they keep pretty close tabs on that.
Great. And Tracy, why don't you just put your email underneath your question where you put it. She also asked about the donor advised funds at your foundation, what you could say about that.
Yeah, so we have several donors who are interested in this space that I've had, again, because I never stopped talking about it. And they've said, hey, when you're ready to go, come to us for a grant. And so I know of several that I can count on. We have some donors, probably as many community foundations who just want to do their own thing. And then I have a list who want to know what's going on in the community, what's the latest and greatest, and what's something interesting that I can fund. And so I've just slowly talked to those people and we'll continue to do that until we're ready to make an ask.
Great, thank you. Next question from Eliza, who I haven't seen in many years, but Liza of Solutions Journalism Network. It's lovely to see you. Solutions Journalism actually helped me with my last foundation, Natalie, in San Antonio. So on the ground there. Her question is about it's about engagement. You've already spoken about access. Can you speak to engagement? What would you say about engagement?
I'm assuming kind of like, what is our community engagement with local news at this point? And
Or Liza, want to just jump in and explain what you were trying to get at, if you can unmute yourself?
I am sorry, it was easier to connect it to the context when you were saying that, when you were talking about it. As you were speaking about the research, and of course, this is incredibly wonderful, kudos to you and the foundation for engaging in this. You were talking about identifying the informational needs of the community, where are the gaps? But does the research, or will the research also contemplate a component of engagement? Because it's not enough for the information to be available and to say, oh, people have access to it, when people don't engage. I mean, we know, for example, many legacy media have tried to do news for Hispanics, do news for the African-American community or for the Arab community, but those communities did not engage with the legacy newsroom. So does the research contemplate this component?
Yes. So the short answer is yes. And that is, that's been one of my biggest frustrations, I think, just in the nonprofit world is, well, we put the information out there. Well, that's not enough. And so that is certainly what we are looking at. What does this end solution need to look like so that it is engaging for our broader population? Because it's not our legacy newspaper.
Thank you. Question from Bob. I'm interested to learn about 2 to 3 examples of foundations who are working with local for-profit newspapers. I don't know if you have that answer. Jennifer Preston might, if she's still on. Patty might. Any examples that come to mind? I mean, obviously there's Seattle, and there's the Seattle, what comes to me is the Seattle Foundation and the work that they did with the Seattle Times. Jennifer, Patty, others. Does anyone else have an example, especially in the commercial space? Jennifer?
Sure. Let's take Iowa. The Western Iowa Foundation has been created, and in just the last year, they have done tremendous work supporting local for-profit newspapers, including the Storm Lake Times, which many of you saw about. Call may be monitored for which many of you saw the film last night around the Storm Lake Times. If Rusty Coates is here on this call, I know he's attending the conference. He is now leading up a foundation that was first created by McClatchy to work with for-profit newspapers that were part of McClatchy, and it now works broadly with for-profit newspapers across the country. The local media association has done a wonderful job, and Frank Munjim is here from LMA, a terrific program to help for-profit and not-for-profit news organizations make those connections with place-based funders and local philanthropy, as well as national philanthropy. So those are just a few examples. Knight did a report shortly before I left. I'll get the link and put it in the chat, called Philanthropic Options for Newspapers.
Real quick, Alice, I'll add that we also looked into a partnership with our local newspaper, which is a for-profit, and the Texas Tribune, where we would actually pay for a regional Texas Tribune reporter to collaborate with our for-profit newspapers. So we are not moving forward with that at this time, but that was something that we were looking at in support of kind of our local legacy newspaper.
These have all been such thoughtful questions. Now, let me ask you a closing question here. As you think about what's possible for Waco, obviously, and you're not committing to anything on this call, and certainly you're doing it to have a really data-driven outcome. But tell me personally what your hope is. You have put a lot of personal grit, time, and an expenditure of the clout and the capital you have internally as well. So you have a dream outcome here, and what is it?
I do. I want to be the model that other communities of our size can look to. I think that the end result is going to be, I don't think it's going to be one specific product. I don't think it's necessarily going to be a website or like an e-newsletter or something like that. I think it's going to have to be several different things that incorporate television, radio, internet, social, and maybe print in some form or fashion. I think if we are committing to serving our entire community in an equitable way, we're going to have to embody all of the different ways people are accessing information and not try and force everyone to look at one thing or to consume one thing. And so what I really see is kind of a multifaceted approach to local news, where there's something for everyone. And I hope that people are eager, and my hope would be that whatever this ends up being is certainly the first place people go to for their information. I think one of the things that we're probably all so frustrated with is where people are going to access information. And so my hope is that we can kind of reshape this and reframe this and say, like, trust your local. This is all local. This is about your local community, and this is where you go for information. So that's my ultimate hope. I think it's going to look different than anything we've done in the past.
Thank you for that. And it's a great reminder that you're not a massive endowment. You're a small to medium-sized community foundation, that it doesn't take an endowment of $1 billion or $3 billion. You don't have to be Silicon Valley Community Foundation, but that each, and the other thing that you said at the very top of your remarks was this, that it will be custom to your community. We've talked in the past about the Spanish language needs of people in your community, the poverty, the different experiences and audiences and groups within your community. So I would like to thank, we're early and I would love to give everyone back time to give you a breather in between your sessions. I'd like to thank LendFest, all of you for attending. Certainly a big hand to my wonderful colleague, Natalie, who I know we're all leaving thinking that we need a Natalie at every community foundation in the country. I know your LinkedIn and your social media will be blowing up when we're finished. But I also want to say to all the community foundations who might be represented here to keep fighting the good fight. I know Allison here is here from Delaware Community Foundation, among others. It may take time, and I know this from coming from a place-based foundation. It is a lot of conversation, research, and bringing a board along, but it has tremendous potential. I also want to thank all of the folks here, the journalists, who are doing this work every day, and especially the development folks who make the revenue possible for this mission and this work, but the journalists and the organizations that are also represented here. Where would we be without your organizations? Where would we be? So both as a journo and as a consumer and a fan, and also representing American Journalism Project. Thank you. Thank you all. You get 15 minutes back. So it makes this the best session you'll attend today, I'm telling you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.